For those of you that have completed the financial plan workbook before, you'll notice the workbook this year is mostly the same. We did try to clean it up and make it a little bit easier to follow, but it is available on our website. So we will start a little bit. I'll go over a brief orientation on our application and trainings, kind of the same stuff I go over each night. We'll talk about the financial plan, which is section 5.1 of the application. We'll talk about budgets and budgeting philosophy. We're going to do a little Nevada Funding 101, and then we'll go into the financial plan workbook. As a reminder, there's 3 of the SPCSA staff on here tonight. Melissa McAdams, our executive director. My name is Katie Broughton. I'm the director of authorizing, and Danny Peltier is the management analyst 3, and often will be the first point of contact for many people in this process. This is our 4th of 5 trainings. Tonight is the financial plan. We have 1 more training in about 2 weeks. It's on the clarifying questions and capacity interview and what that process looks like. Another reminder, there are 3 keystone documents to this process from the SPCSA. The guidance document, which kind of puts the application and the rubric side by side and then offers additional guidance on the application as a whole. The application template, which is available as a Word document. We recommend downloading it and filling it out in the Word document and then converting it to a PDF. And then the rubric, which describes the characteristics of a strong response that would meet standards. And the rubric is what evaluators use to score each application. The application guidance is divided into 2 parts. Part 1 is the introduction, a glossary of terms, resources, and an application overview. And part 2 is where it breaks down the application questions on one side and the rubric on the other. And then our application timeline is here. The notice of intent deadline did pass. The next critical deadline is April 30th, which is when the application deadline is. We do open up the epicenter test starting on April 15th, so you've got about 2 weeks to submit that application. As a reminder, 2 applicant types. One is a committee to form. This is the most popular one, and there are various membership requirements as outlined in NRS. And then the other one is a CMO who might want to apply as the CMO with the intent to hold the contract or to establish a new governing board and transition that contract. If you're not sure which of these applicants your team falls into, please reach out to us directly and we can help guide you. And then finally, the various sections of our application. Tonight, we're going to cover the financial plan, which is really the narrative. And the narrative has some pieces of the rubric as to it. And then the probably most important piece is the budget, which is in the financial plan workbook. So let's start with 5.1, the financial plan. So to start off with, we think it's important to talk about what's included in a financial plan. And a financial plan is really kind of 2 big things. The first is policies and practices that govern how the school will hold and spend its money. Those policies and practices must be aligned with generally accepted accounting processes and best practices in Nevada charter school finance, which are based on sort of charter school finance best practices throughout the country. It should also demonstrate an understanding of the obligation to safeguard public funds. It is really important to remember these are public dollars, and public dollars have a lot of accountability associated with them. There also needs to be evidence of adequate checks and balances in the school and the board that shows a clear segregation of duties, outlines responsibilities, figures out who is responsible for what, and the various roles each person plays. The other big part of the financial plan is financial projections that show how enrollment, public and private dollars, and expenses will interact over the term of the charter contract. Very simply, what are your assets and what are your liabilities, and how are you paying for those liabilities with your assets? The financial plan question or section of the application has various questions, which are on the left, and then the application sections, which are on the right. Some key phrases are underlined in bold. We want to see the systems in which the school will manage accounting, purchasing, payroll, and audits. Those are all critical pieces of this process. What are the administrative services that the school plans to contract for? And that also includes procurement process and criteria. So like, when does the board release like an RFP versus when are they able to just bring somebody on or, bring in a company to do a service? The second important piece is regarding the annual financial audit. Those are required of every single charter school every single year. We want to understand what the plan is for that audit and the planned financial controls that the audit will also discuss. And then we're looking for a financial manager that has appropriate expertise to provide accurate and timely information to decision makers, how the school is going to ensure that they're able to pay mission critical expenses, especially if there are budget cuts. We want to see that the budget doesn't appropriate for any fund any amount in excess of the budget resources. Essentially, each budget needs to be balanced. We want to see that there's an appropriate segregation of financial duties, that there are control systems that will ensure that only allowable expenses are made, and we want to see projections that are accurate, conservative, and legally compliant. We also want to talk about, or we'll want to see the school's contingency plan, what they're going to do if revenue is lower than anticipated. Revenue is likely going to be lower than anticipated if enrollment targets are not met. And then as attachment 22, we'll get a budget narrative that includes a detailed description of various assumptions, revenue estimates, and then a bunch of other items here. Again, we want to see that those priorities are consistent with the model. One of the things that we notice is enrollment. There's a couple of different places throughout the application that enrollment lives. Your projected enrollment tables in your application should match the projected enrollment in your budget. If your budget numbers are more than like your break-even number in the application, that would be an item of concern. Before we move on to the budget and budgeting philosophy, are there any questions on the rubric and/or application questions? All right, we'll keep trucking. So we're kind of this year taking it back to the basics and trying to figure out what even really is a budget. And it's important to remember that budgets are living documents. They are developed and approved by the board before the start of each school year. So what you're going to give us is sort of a projected budget. But the actual official budget is required to be adopted by the school in June, the year before, in June before the school starts in August. The template that we provide allows you to explore kind of different areas of enrollment and projections and how expenses are impacted by some of those choices. And then to see also like how some of your enrollment numbers impact your revenue. Your financial plan should project budget elements such as enrollment, staffing, income, and expenses annually for the full term of the charter, which is from the incubation year. We refer to that as year 0 through year 6. The first charter contract, if the application is approved, is a 6-year contract. And then if the application is approved, the budget becomes kind of your spending guide and the tool by which you and your board will measure your financial success. But again, you will have to sort of pass your own budget for the upcoming school year. The committee to form should have a universal understanding of the board's philosophy for financial policy and practice. Everybody on the committee to form should have a pretty good and solid working understanding of the budget, what the budget priorities are, what the minimum enrollment for financial viability is, and sort of the different areas that the budget outlines spending. It's also important that the board and the school staff are aligned on critical areas like spending priorities and non-negotiables, and those should sort of match the narrative in the other sections of the application. So in the application, if you determine that professional development throughout the first year of the school is really critical, to ensure that the teachers are meeting the academic needs of students and meeting the mission of the school, then your budget should reflect a pretty healthy professional development line item that shows that you're able to invest your financial resources in that budget. And then balanced annual budgets or budgets resulting in an annual surplus are indicators of a strong proposal. You cannot have a deficit in your budget. So if your budget doesn't balance out to zero or end with a positive unbalance, that would be a major area of concern for the review team. General questions on that? All right, so we're going to talk then a little bit about Nevada Funding 101 and talk about sort of how funding in Nevada works. And I will tell you there are some complex slides on here, but I think that can be really helpful. And these are things that we go over also with schools who are in their incubation year because it can be really confusing. So it's important to note that the funding system in Nevada is referred to as the Pupil-Centered Funding Plan, or PCFP. And each county has an adjusted base funding amount for public schools. And so there's like an amount associated with each student that depends on which county you're in. So the amount for Clark is a little bit less than the amount for Washoe. And those amounts are just under $10,000. How much of that money you get and how many students you're paid for is based upon your average daily enrollment, and that number is recorded every quarter and reported to the Nevada Department of Education by each school. Charter schools receive a monthly payment from NDE, and that monthly payment includes the PCFP adjusted base funding, as well as weighted funding, which is calculated based on certain student populations. In the first year, though, no weighted funding will be given to schools in their first year of operation. The first payment of the year does come on August 1st and is paid based on the prior year's fourth quarter average daily enrollment. So for example, if a school is open right now, they'll enter the fourth quarter daily enrollment here in May. And in the first quarter of next year, they'll be based on the number of students and the average daily enrollment they had for that quarter. So the per pupil funding is always 1 quarter behind. It's based on the previous quarter's average daily enrollment. For new schools, the August 1st payment is based on an audit enrollment that the SPCSA conducts in May or June of the incubation year. So at that time, we will work with you and kind of go through your enrollment records, and however many students you have fully enrolled that we are able to verify will be how many students you get paid for in August of that next school year. Now, this is really, really important to note because basically what that means is you have to hit your enrollment target by May to June before the school year starts. So you've got to be really, really diligent about hitting that enrollment target really early, because any students that you get in the summertime after we've done our audit, you won't get paid for until the second quarter. So it's really, really, really critical that you hit that enrollment target and are prepared to show us those documents by May or June before the start of the school year. Following each quarterly ADE report, NDE will true up PCFP payments to reflect actual enrollment for the prior quarter. So let's say quarter one, your average daily enrollment is 100 students. But your quarter four, the previous year was 98 students. So in quarter one, NDE would pay you for 98 students, but you actually had 100. So they would pay you for those additional 2 students in the true-up payment at the end of November. Now, again, what's really critical about this is if you show enrollment in May or June of 50 students, you're going to get paid your first few payments at 50 students, period. Let's just say, though, that you do a ton of recruitment and your enrollment goes up by the first day of school to 100 students. For 3 months, you then have to serve 100 students but you're only getting paid for 50. So it's really, 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 really important that you're hitting those enrollment targets early, because if you're not, you're going to be trying to pay for services with not enough income coming in. And then weighted per pupil. So there's a couple of categories of weighted. There's FRL, which is free and reduced lunch, EL, IEP, and GATE. And FRL actually should be at risk. At risk, EL, IEP, and GATE. And those are based on the prior year's counts for that. So that funding isn't given until year 2. So no weighted funding is provided in year 1 because those counts come the following year. So I'm going to show a couple of calendars that I think will hopefully help this be a little bit more obvious. So again, the first quarter of the fiscal year or school year is August, September, and October. And the ADE that's used for these 3 payments is the 4th quarter from the previous year. Again, if you're a new school, it's the audited enrollment number that we get in May or June before that year. The second quarter, so the payments in November, December, and January, come from the first quarter's ADE. Third quarter, February, March, and April, those payments come from the second quarter's ADE. And then fourth quarter, May, June, and July, those payments come from the third quarter's ADE. So the PCFP payment is always 1 quarter behind in terms of enrollment. This is really critical for schools that are growing, for new schools, because enrollment can fluctuate so much. And so it's really, really, really critical to make sure that your budget is pretty conservative and provides an enrollment target that you can probably hit by May or June before the school year starts. This is another map of how the payments work, and you can see here, you get payment 1 in August, payment 2 in September, and payment 3 in October. October is when you do your quarter 1 ADE, so it's when you report on that. And the true up for quarter 1 comes early November. So again, if your enrollment number is really different at the start of the school year than it is from the enrollment audit that we do, you're then trying to pay for more students for 3 months than you have. And that's a really bad position for schools to be in. Same thing here. You get paid November, December. In December, January, you do your quarter 2 ADE, and then the true up will come at the beginning of February. And so this really shows kind of how the calendar works and when various payments can be expected. Understanding the timing of these things can be really critical because obviously a new school has to spend a lot of money up front. A lot of purchases have to be made before August 1st when that first payment comes in. So it's really, really critical to have a pretty good understanding of the timing of how this all works. Are there any questions on that piece of how the funding model works? All right, then we will jump into understanding the financial plan workbook. So we'll jump into the actual workbook here in a minute. Oh, Danny, that was too fast. But we want to understand first the purpose of the workbook and then what the template looks like. So the workbook itself is designed to allow you to demonstrate knowledge of the costs and expenses of the school that you propose. And it's a place for you to kind of pencil out what those expenses look like and how they relate to your revenue. It's also how you show understanding of cash flow with regard to public school funding. And if it's used correctly, it should show your understanding of the fiscal responsibilities of a charter school. I think I said this, but your completed financial plan workbook is not your actual budget for your first year of operation. You have to submit that budget on a separate template to us and the Department of NDE in June before the start of the school year. Some things to note about the template itself. It's designed to help your team determine how much it's going to cost to run your school, and hopefully also help you see like how you're going to then get that revenue to be where you want it to be. It is a tool that should be used in the development of your application. It should also be checked against all of the things that you say in your application. One of the biggest issues we see is that either one person on the team or a back office provider does the budget, and the budget doesn't actually match what's in the application, and that's a huge problem. You want to make sure that it's a collaborative effort and that everybody on the committee to form has a really good understanding of what's in the financial plan workbook. Once it's submitted, your entire team should be prepared to like study and understand that workbook before the capacity interview, because it's also something that is asked about quite a bit usually in the capacity interview. And we do recommend that all members of the applicant team have access to their budget during that capacity interview. Before we get into the workbook, we want to look at some basic directions with regard to the sheets. We color coded it this year to hopefully make it really easy to follow. Essentially, applicants are required to put input numbers into the yellow tabs. And there will be, in the yellow tabs, there will be yellow cells for you to fill out. Not every yellow cell requires an input, but it should be where most of the inputs go. And then we will say, if you run into any like major technical issues or you need cells unlocked that are locked, please reach out to me or Danny, and we will help kind of you facilitate that. If you're running into any of those concerns, we can unlock things and address things as they need to be. All right, Danny's now going to pull up the financial plan workbook. And we're going to go through it. So this is on our Open as Schools website, and then I think Danny also included it in the email out. It is differently formatted from previous years, but in all, the content and function is largely the same. For the sake of this training, we're going to do a quick walkthrough of the sheets from left to right, but we encourage you as you're developing your budget to check how your inputs in one sheet are impacting other areas. Tabs with blue fills are pre-populated with content by the SPCSA and do not require any applicant inputs. And in most worksheets with applicant input cells, there's a column at the right side of the sheet called comment sources and notes, which Danny is not on that one, but it is on the next one. All the way to the right. Yep. We encourage you to use that. It is our experience that the strongest applicants use that space to describe the basis for the figures they've projected in the worksheet and any assertions in the budget narratives. If you don't provide explanations, assume that you'll receive a number of questions, line item questions regarding how some of your assumptions were reached and what you've included in specific expense categories. Okay, Danny, will you take us back to the instructions tab all the way on the left? So the first tab is instructions. These have been revised from last year to correctly align with the order and content of the tabs as they're presented here in this workbook. We strongly suggest that you closely read these directions before you begin developing your budget, and you'll note that there are detailed instructions for each sheet, some of which have specific row and column references. Next, we have the cover and location tab. So you'll notice it's yellow, which means it has yellow inputs that you need to fill out. The changes to this sheet are primarily in columns F through I. As you will see, we're asking you to specify the primary preparers of the budget. It's important for evaluators to understand which members of the committee to form participated in the development of the budget and which proposed board member approved the submission of this document. Your committee to form, especially the proposed school leaders and board members, will be expected to be very familiar with this budget workbook and should be able to answer any line item questions about any of the worksheets during the capacity interview or in the clarifying questions. This also means that we recommend you have access to this document during the capacity interview. We'll now move to the enrollment and revenue worksheet. You'll notice on this that you will enter your target enrollment figures, which should align with the plan presented in your application narrative. You'll also note that the narrative application will ask you to project a minimum enrollment scenario, which is the smallest number at which the school is financially viable, which basically means it would break even. The application also asks you to do a maximum enrollment scenario, which is 110% of the contractually allowed school enrollment cap. You will also include projections for special populations to determine state-weighted funding, though again, it's important to note that schools will not receive weighted funding until year 2. You will enter per pupil revenue projections for federal funding, and you will project other funding such as grant revenue, fundraising, and philanthropic donations. It's also important to note that you cannot include unsecured funds in your financial plan, which means any revenue presented in rows 133 through 142, which Danny's going to scroll down to, must be backed up by supporting documents issued by a funding source. So that might be an award letter that you secured a grant or a donation commitment letter. The supporting evidence must include the dollar amount that will be given, and that dollar amount in the budget should match whatever the grant, award notification, or donation commitment letter says. You should also be prepared to explain what your spending priorities and plans are if you receive funds that are currently unsecured, such as the federal CSP grant, which we know many of our applicants apply for at the same time. Finally, you should be prepared to explain how you will fund expenses that must be paid prior to the funding from public sources. So again, you won't receive a first payment from NDE until August 1st. So what is the plan to pay for any expenses before August 1st? All right, Danny, let's move to the next tab, which is cash flow year 1. On this tab, you will demonstrate your understanding of school revenue and expense cycles. This worksheet has changed from previous years in that you must now manually input expenses in each row in each month. And only rows 19 and 20, which are the PCFP revenue and the SPCSA fee, will populate automatically. Note that in columns C, D, and E, the worksheet will tally the monthly inputs for each row and then compare them to the amounts provided in the enrollment and revenue tab or the general operating tab and calculate a variance. The evaluation team will analyze these variants, not just your monthly surplus or deficit. Next, we move to the staff tab. This is one that applicants should treat with extra care. It has changed from previous years, and it's also an area in which we see there's not alignment between this section of the budget and the application. You really want to make sure that the staff that's presented on the staff tab matches the organization chart that you submit, the staff schedules, and your enrollment plans. Applicant inputs begin on row 55 here. The rows above summarize the staffing plan based on the below inputs. When you're inputting staff, you want to make sure you're using the same title for each person that you use in the application narrative and attachments. So if you call the school leader of your school, I don't know, the speaker of ABC Charter School, you'll want that name in the org chart, you'll want that name in the narrative, and you'll want that name here in the budget. It's also essential that you follow naming conventions that are provided in each section so that evaluators can analyze alignment between your stated staffing plans and the rollout you've provided. For example, if your elementary school is planning to use a department structure for grades grades 5 through 8, then your staff worksheet should include the number of classroom level teachers, K4, as well as the subject area teachers for the department grades 5 and 8. Another area of misalignment we sometimes see are specialized teachers. Those are teachers for students with disabilities or English learners, which are separate from general education teachers. We will also look to this and, if you don't have any special education or English learner teachers, we will ask quite a few questions. Additionally, strong applications should include information in the notes, sources, comments column on the right that support the assumptions shown, as well as any assertions that are made in this budget narrative. For example, if you plan to assert that your salary and benefits package for teachers are competitive to the local teachers union, you could provide comparison figures from that scale for various positions to demonstrate that. All right, Danny, we'll move to the facilities tab. So this worksheet has two sections. One, if you plan to lease the building, the other, if you plan to purchase the property. You'll complete whichever section is relevant. Don't do both. If you have not secured a facility by the time you submit your application, that's completely fine. But we'll want to see that you've done your due diligence, and you'll really want to use that comments, notes, and sources column. That'll help us show that you've done your due diligence to figure out like how much commercial space that you're looking for is going in the area that you've identified and what you're planning to prepare for. We wanted to be clear that just saying that a certain dollar amount per square foot is market rate doesn't really make it true. You'll want to explain to us the basis for which you've made the projections you have. And then as a reminder, the review team is not just looking at projected costs of a facility, but they're also looking to see that the figures presented for available space align with the proposed class sizes and model specific physical spaces in the application. If you project to have a school of, 200, but your space is really small, that's going to inspire some questions. All right, Danny, we're going to move to the general operating worksheet. This worksheet is where any applicant will detail the expenses involved with implementing the educational model and operating the school. This should include detail and specificity. Those will really help you and your review team. In this workbook, you should clearly align the spending with the application narrative and startup plan. So for example, if the narrative proposes a school uniform and states that the uniform will be provided at no cost to the students, there needs to be a uniform budget in rows 85 and 86. If the narrative indicates that there will be 2 weeks of pre-opening professional development for all staff, embedded professional development throughout the school year, then the budget should show dollars to match that. If you enter figures into any line item for consultants, you'll want to specify the services they provide. What are they consulting on? And then any specific contracted or other services, which begins in row 130. You'll want to really identify the service clearly and be sure to describe the basis for the funds projected. So how are you determining what the cost of those services will be? The insurance worksheet is going to be next. This requires the applicant to project all costs for mandatory insurance the school must carry while in operation. Your school may wish to carry more than the minimum coverage amount. We would recommend that you contact an insurance agent with significant experience in insuring charter schools to determine the correct level of coverage and receive an accurate quote. Again, that would be something you could include in the notes. And then Danny, we're going to move to the FFE&T. So the Furniture, Fixtures, Equipment, and Technology tab requires you to demonstrate an understanding of requirements of having a student-ready facility on the first day of school, as well as having technology and equipment required to empower the staff to provide all the elements of the school model. For example, if you provide a technology-rich environment or specialty furniture in the application narrative, those costs would be clearly delineated on this tab. Additionally, evaluators will analyze the expenses year over year to determine alignment with the school's model, the grade and classroom rollout, and the staff hiring plan. And then Danny, we're going to go to the marketing tab next. This asks our applicants to estimate the cost of marketing the school to potential student, staff, and the community in the pre-opening period, and then annually to support robust enrollment and staffing. Again, can't specify enough how critical this is so that you have a fully enrolled school by about May before the school year starts. The next tab, Danny, is EMO, CMO, BOSP. This is required only if the school plans to contract with a provider of this type. So that would be an education management organization, a charter management organization, or a back office service provider. Back office service providers does include vendors that offer financial management services. Some ones that we see a lot are EdTech and CSMC, who I believe are both on this call. If you do not plan to work with one of these types of providers, then you can enter N in cell D15 and keep moving on. And then last is the summary worksheet, which is largely populated by content from other worksheets. However, all applicants should closely review this sheet and input any data as needed. Note that this worksheet will calculate several of the asset ratios that we review for every school annually and that we use for our financial metrics. I will just say this document is a lot. There are a lot of pieces of it. As you're working through it, as you're trying it out, as you're playing around with it, if you have technical questions, please reach out to us. We can help you figure out where to put something. If you can't quite figure it out, we can unlock cells. But sort of the more familiar you are with it, as early as possible, the better, so that we have adequate time and you have adequate time to fill it out appropriately. Before Danny stops sharing his screen, does anyone have any specific questions they want to ask on the workbook?
I do actually. Hello, everyone. I am Kimberly Jackson from the Ivy School, Polish Charter School. And so part of what our mission and vision is around remediating dyslexia and autism. And so a big piece of that is becoming a Medicaid provider so that we can provide specialized services to our students. And so my question is around adding this to the workbook. Can we add any reimbursements from Medicaid to the workbook now? Is that something that we can't consider in terms of thinking about our budget and the services we provide our students?
Kimberly. Oh, I'm getting weird background. Are you getting background?
I can shut off my mic.
Okay, perfect. This is Melissa Macadin. I'm the executive director. I don't think we've ever met. Nice to meet you, Kimberly. So to answer your question, in Nevada, a school can only submit for Medicaid reimbursement through their LEA. So we will be your LEA. We are in the process right now of getting that set up so that our schools can take advantage of it. I don't think it's likely that it will be completely rolled out to all schools by next school year. So realistically, you potentially you could add it in, but you're going to have to give some really good justification about where you're getting your data for like what those reimbursement rates are. Like really good like justification and evidence and etc. Um, if your school was approved, it is likely that by that school year we would be up and operational. But I want to be clear, like it's not a guarantee. And if I were in your shoes and trying to like do a conservative budget, I would make sure my budget balanced without those funds. Um, Getting set up for Medicaid is no small feat. We have been working on it for an entire year, and I'd say we're about 20% there. So it's not easy. And I definitely don't think you should if you need those funds to balance your budget, it's probably not going to fly because we just don't know for sure that we will be fully operational.
Okay, thank you for the clarity. I appreciate that.
And Kimberly, that's going to be great because then any money you do get back is like frosting on top of your cake. Extra money is always great in the charter school sector. All right, we will keep moving. So Danny, you can stop sharing your screen. So a couple of do's and don'ts of the financial plan workbook. Again, as much as possible, use comments, notes, sources column to explain the basis for your assumptions and demonstrate that they are realistic and feasible. Remember, the people reviewing your application spend a lot of time in the charter school sector, and we do know a lot about charter school finances, so it's going to be pretty obvious to us if those things don't make sense. So the more you can explain on the front end, the better off you'll be. You'll want to work across sheets to check implications of some of your inputs and how they affect other areas of the workbook. And then again, you'll really, really want to make sure that what you put in your workbook matches the narrative and not just the financial plan narrative, but like the whole narrative of your charter application. Please don't add, delete, hide, or unhide worksheets or rows or columns within worksheets. If you contact us and we tell you to do something like that, that might be one thing, but generally we want to see all of these things. And then please don't reformat or reorganize sheets or individual cells. We already stopped for questions. So that really takes us to the kind of the end of this training and our questions and next steps. So like I said, this is the 4th of 5 trainings. The next training we have is in about 2 weeks and some odd days. And it'll be on clarifying questions in the capacity interview. This will be the first year that we've done that training, and we're actually really looking forward to it. Important dates. The window for letters of intent closed, and we are working on scheduling one-on-ones with each team that submitted a letter of intent to better understand kind of where you're at in this process and what your charter application is. So some of you might have heard from us, some of you have confirmed scheduling something, some of you haven't heard from us yet, but we are working on doing that, and we're hoping to schedule all of those by the end of March. And then our applications are due via Epicenter between April 15th and April 30th. And any questions regarding that can be sent to Danny or sent to me. And all of these directions are in the various documents, and really specifically the guidance document. So that's the end of what we have tonight. Again, I just really encourage people to go through that financial plan workbook, spend some time in it, get comfortable. And then if you have questions that pop up, reach out to us. It's kind of one of those things that everybody typically has some unique things that they need in that workbook, and we can try to help you kind of make it be what you need it to be. But that's what we have for you tonight. We made this one a little bit shorter than the others. If you have any questions, you can feel free to stay on and ask us. Otherwise, we hope you have a great evening.
Thank you.